My son looked straight at me on his wedding day, smiled for the photographer, then leaned close enough for only me to hear and said, "Mom, I need you in the kitchen. The staff is short, and Celeste thinks you'd just be more useful there." I was 64 years old, wearing a sage silk dress I had saved for 3 months to buy, and holding the card with my blessing inside it when he took my elbow and steered me away from the ceremony arch like I was a late delivery, not his mother. "Hey, everyone, I'm Grace, and I'll say this plain. The second a son treats his mother like hired help on his wedding day, something is rotten all the way to the bone." What would you have done right there? I didn't argue. That was my first mistake. Though if I'm honest, it was also a habit I had trained into myself for 30 years. Adrian Vale had spent most of his life speaking to me in tones that sounded polite to strangers and dismissive to anyone who knew him well. There was always a little varnish on his cruelty, a polished finish. Enough to make you doubt your own hurt. Enough to make you think maybe you were too sensitive, too old-fashioned, too emotional, too something. By the time he guided me through a side corridor of the Rosemere Estate ballroom and pushed open the kitchen doors with the confidence of a man assigning labor, I had already begun doing what I'd done my whole adult life. I had started excusing him. "It's just until they recover the timing," he said. "One of the banquet girls didn't show. You know, food service stuff. You're good at practical things." Food service stuff. I had cooked every Thanksgiving meal he remembered, every birthday roast, every pan of lasagna when one of his girlfriends wanted to impress people in a house she had never cleaned. I had spent winters standing over stock pots, fragrant with bay leaf and clove, while he was out learning how to pronounce words like portfolio and acquisition. I had made coq au vin from a cookbook with a cracked spine when he was 16 and wanted to impress a debate coach. I had ironed napkins for his first engagement party to a different woman. And now, in a ballroom kitchen that smelled of seared beef, reduction sauce, and hot copper, my son was reducing my entire life to practical things. The head caterer, a narrow man with sharp cuffs and a voice like a paper cut, turned when he saw me. "Who is this?" "My mother," Adrian said. Then, after the slightest pause, "She'll help. Not she wants to help. Not she offered. Not even please." The caterer looked me over, taking in the silk dress, the low heels, the pearl drops I had worn only 3 times before. "Fine," he said. "Gloves are there. We need the fennel salad plated, champagne trays reset, and someone to carry the late canapes through the east entrance. Move fast." And that was that. No one asked whether I had eaten. No one asked whether I belonged in the photographs they were taking out on the lawn under white roses and August light. A girl young enough to be my granddaughter handed me a pair of clear gloves and apologized with her eyes, though not with her mouth. I slipped them on. They snapped at the wrist. The kitchen was a world of steel counters, burner hiss, and clipped instructions. Truffle steam rose from one station. At another, lamb chops gleamed under herb butter. Somebody cursed over a broken siphon. Somebody else shouted for microgreens. I stood for a moment with my purse still over my shoulder, listening to the hard clatter of service, and realized with a strange, cold clarity that not one person in that room knew I was the groom's mother. To them, I was simply an older woman dragged in to plug a gap. I set my purse beneath a prep table and picked up a stack of appetizer spoons. That was the thing about humiliation. It rarely arrived all at once. It came in layers. First the shock, then the effort to stay composed, then the tiny practical details that made the insult real, the sting of glove powder on my fingertips, a smear of beet puree on the cuff of my dress, the ache in my lower back from standing too long in a room where I should never have been standing at all. I plaited endive leaves with whipped chèvre and candied walnut dust, while, somewhere beyond the swinging doors, a string quartet played the entrance music for the ceremony I had imagined attending from the front row. I thought of the invitation I had never actually received. Adrian had called 2 weeks earlier and said, "You know the date, so let's not get hung up on paper." At the time, I told myself modern people did things differently. Celeste Rowan, my future daughter-in-law, was always curating something: flowers, menus, social impressions. She spoke about their wedding the way museum directors speak about exhibitions: controlled lighting, intentional seating, refined guest energy. I should have known there was intention in my missing invitation, too. A waitress hurried past me with a tray of coupe glasses. "Table 9 needs the caviar blinis now." The caterer pointed at me. "You. Take these." He loaded a silver tray into my hands, and I felt its weight settle into my wrists. Blinis the size of old coins, each topped with crème fraîche and a glistening black pearl of caviar. Beautiful little bites for beautiful people. I carried them toward the east entrance, shoulders back, careful steps, the way I used to carry Adrian asleep from the car to his bed, without waking him. Funny what the body remembers. Just before I pushed through the door, I heard laughter from the corridor. Adrian's laughter. Then Celeste's lighter, sharper one. "Is she managing?" Celeste asked. "She's in her element," Adrian replied. The words slid under my ribs so neatly they hardly felt like pain at first. In her element. As if a kitchen was my natural habitat. As if a woman could raise a son, save him, feed him, fund him, forgive him, and still be seen by him as part of the service corridor. I balanced the tray and walked on. But something inside me, something old, patient, and dangerously awake, had started to count. The ballroom doors opened with a soft, elegant sweep, and just like that, I stepped out of heat and noise into polished light. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above round tables dressed in ivory linen, each one arranged with a precision that felt almost surgical. Gold-rimmed plates, folded napkins like little sculptures, centerpieces of white peonies and eucalyptus that probably cost more than my first car. And everywhere, voices, laughter, the soft clink of glasses, a curated kind of happiness. No one looked at me twice. That was the second layer of it, not being seen. I moved between tables with the tray balanced steady in my hands, offering those delicate blinis to people who smiled without really looking. A man in a charcoal suit took one and said, "Thank you," the way you thank furniture that works properly. A woman with a voice like chilled glass leaned toward her friend and whispered something about the Rowan side really outdoing themselves. Not a word about the Vale side. Not a word about me. I recognized no one. That, too, told me everything. Adrian had built a life where I didn't fit, then curated an event where I didn't belong, and finally assigned me a role where I wouldn't be noticed. It was efficient, I'll give him that. Clean. No scenes, no awkward introductions, no explanations needed, just remove the variable. As I stepped past table 7, I caught my reflection in a mirrored column. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman looking back. Gloves, tray, shoulders slightly tense. Not a guest, not family, staff. I adjusted my posture, straightened my back. Not invisible. Not yet. "Excuse me," someone said behind me. I turned. A young man, mid-30s, well-tailored, eyes sharp in a way that suggested he missed very little. He wasn't reaching for the tray. He was looking at me. "Were you part of the kitchen team?" he asked. There was no rudeness in it, just curiosity. I held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then I said, evenly, "No." He frowned slightly, like something didn't add up. But before he could ask more, someone called his name from across the room. He hesitated, nodded politely, and stepped away. That was the first crack. Small, barely noticeable, but real. I continued moving through the room, but now I was watching differently, listening differently. Not just hearing the music or the chatter, but picking up fragments. Adrian closed that deal in March. Celeste's family, old money, I heard. They said the guest list was very selective. Selective. I almost smiled at that. Near the head table, I slowed just enough to see them clearly. Adrian stood there, glass in hand, surrounded by people who leaned in when he spoke. He looked perfect, composed, confident. Exactly the man he had always wanted to become. Beside him, Celeste was radiant in a way that didn't come from happiness, but from control. Every detail of her, hair, posture, expression, was curated down to the last millimeter. And for a moment, I saw it from the outside. The picture. The version of the story they wanted everyone to believe. There was no place for me in that picture. A server brushed past me, muttering under her breath about timing. The next course was already being prepared. The machine was moving forward, smooth and relentless, and I was just another cog. "Ma'am, we need those trays cleared?" The caterer's voice cut in from behind me. "Of course we do." I nodded, turned, and began collecting empty glasses from a nearby table. 1, 2, 3, my hands moving automatically, the way they always had. Efficient, quiet, reliable. That was when I heard it, not loud, not meant for me. Adrian's voice, low, amused. "I told you she'd handle it. She always does." A ripple of soft laughter followed, and just like that, something settled inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, sharper. Clarity. I picked up the last glass, placed it carefully on the tray, and for the first time that day, I stopped excusing him. I went back through the service doors with an empty tray and a mind that had gone very, very quiet. Not blank. No, it was sharper than that. Focused. Like the moment right before you slice into something delicate and expensive, knowing one wrong movement will ruin it. The kitchen hit me again in waves. Heat, noise, urgency. Someone shouted for more plates. Someone else cursed over a missing garnish. A tray crashed somewhere to my left, followed by a quick, clipped apology. The machine never stopped. It just absorbed mistakes and moved forward. I set the tray down and reached for another stack of porcelain. "Faster, please," the caterer snapped without looking at me. "We're behind." Of course we were. I picked up a cloth and started wiping the rims of plates that didn't need wiping. It gave my hands something to do while my thoughts rearranged themselves. 30 years. That number came to me without warning. 30 years of meals that appeared on tables without applause. 30 years of laundry folded into neat, quiet stacks. 30 years of nights where I didn't sleep because Adrian had a fever, a crisis, a deadline, a debt, a broken something, car, relationship, ego. 30 years of stepping in before things collapsed so he could walk through life believing collapse never touched him. And now, here I was, still stepping in, still smoothing things over, still making sure his evening ran perfectly. I picked up a tray of seared scallops, each one resting on a pale green puree that smelled faintly of something refined. Pea and mint, maybe? A drizzle of something citrusy. A dustin of micro-herbs so small they looked like decoration rather than food. I carried them to the pass. "Take those out," the caterer said, finally glancing at me. "And try not to hold them like that. You're tilting." I adjusted my grip without responding. That was another thing. Correction without context. Authority without question. It felt familiar in a way I didn't like admitting, because Adrian had learned that tone somewhere. I pushed through the doors again, stepping back into the glow of the reception. The music had shifted. Something livelier now. Glasses were fuller. Laughter louder. The night was warming up, exactly as planned. Exactly as funded. I moved table to table, placing scallops in front of people who didn't know my name, who didn't need to. A woman in emerald silk waved me closer without making eye contact, pointing at an empty space in front of her as if I were part of the furniture arrangement. I set the plate down. "Thank you," she said absently, already turning back to her conversation about villas in Santorini. Santorini. I remembered when Adrian was 9 and asked if we could go to the ocean. Not Greece, not even Florida. Just the nearest stretch of cold, gray coastline 2 hours away. I packed sandwiches, boiled eggs, and a thermos of tea. He got sand in his shoes and laughed like it was the best day of his life. I wondered when that boy disappeared, or if I had simply stopped seeing clearly. As I reached the head table again, I slowed, just slightly, enough to hear. Celeste was speaking this time. "I mean, we couldn't risk anything feeling off," she said, her voice smooth but edged. "You know how these things are. Energy matters." A man beside her nodded. "Absolutely. You curate the room, or the room curates you." Soft laughter. "And his mother?" someone asked. Casual. Curious. A pause. Then Adrian, easy, controlled. "She prefers to stay out of the spotlight. Always has." There it was. Not just dismissal. Rewriting. I placed the last scallop down in front of a man who didn't look up, then straightened. For a moment I considered speaking. Just a single sentence. Something simple. Something that would fracture the entire illusion they had built so carefully. But I didn't. Not yet. Because something deeper had already begun. Not a reaction. A calculation. I turned away from the table and walked back toward the kitchen, each step measured, steady. My back didn't ache anymore. My hands didn't tremble. The humiliation hadn't disappeared. It had transformed into something useful. As I pushed the door open, the scent of butter and heat wrapped around me again. But now it felt different. Not like a place I had been sent to. Like a place I was observing, cataloging, preparing. I reached under the prep table where I had left my purse earlier and pulled it out, setting it gently on the counter. Inside, tucked between my wallet and a folded linen handkerchief, was a small notebook I hadn't used in years. I opened it. The pages were blank. For now, I picked up a pen, and for the first time that night, I didn't write a recipe. I wrote a number. 30 years. Then I underlined it once. Slowly. Carefully. Like the beginning of something that would not be undone. I didn't leave immediately. That's what most people expect, I think. That humiliation either breaks you on the spot or sends you running. But real breaking doesn't look like that. It looks quiet, controlled, functional. I stayed. I worked through the next hour like I had worked through most of my life. efficiently, invisibly, without asking for anything in return. I plated, carried, cleared, adjusted. I refilled champagne towers that caught the light like cut glass. I wiped down surfaces no one would ever think about. I listened without looking like I was listening. And all the while, I counted. Not money, not yet. Moments. The way Adrian never once came into that kitchen, not even to check, not even to pretend. The way Celeste passed by the service corridor once, glanced in, and then looked away quickly, as if acknowledging me would complicate the narrative she had so carefully arranged. The way guests thanked me without seeing me, the way staff directed me without questioning me. Piece by piece, it formed something solid inside me. Not anger, structure. At one point, a young server handed me a stack of folded linen napkins and said, "These need to go out with the dessert course." Dessert? Of course. I nodded and took them, running my fingers briefly over the fabric. High thread count, crisp, expensive. Everything about this wedding was expensive, everything except respect. The final course was something elaborate, dark chocolate torte with a mirror glaze so perfect it reflected the chandeliers above like still water. There was gold leaf on top, actual gold. I carried one of the trays out, moving carefully between tables as the room softened into that late evening glow where people leaned closer, spoke lower, laughed more freely. Adrian stood near the center again, one hand resting lightly on Celeste's back. He looked proud, like everything had gone exactly as planned. And maybe it had, until now. As I passed behind him, I heard it again. Not meant for me, not meant to hurt. That's what made it worse. She insisted on coming, Celeste was saying softly to a couple beside her. We didn't want to make it awkward, so we just found a way to include her. Include. I almost stopped walking. Almost, but I didn't. Because in that moment, something inside me finally aligned completely. There it is, I thought. The truth. Not hidden, not disguised, just reframed. I wasn't excluded, I was repurposed. I delivered the last plate, turned, and walked back toward the kitchen for what I knew would be the final time that night. The doors swung shut behind me with a soft, decisive sound. Inside, the pace had slowed. The storm of service was ending. Staff were beginning to clean down stations, voices lower now, movements less urgent. The caterer was checking something on a clipboard, already mentally moving on to the next event, the next client, the next perfectly executed illusion. I removed the gloves from my hands slowly, peeling them off finger by finger. My skin underneath was slightly damp, faintly marked. I folded them neatly and set them on the counter. Then I reached for my purse. The notebook was still open where I had left it. The single line, 30 years, stared back at me. I added another. Every meal. Then another. Every load of laundry. The pen moved steadily now. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just quiet, deliberate motion. Every night, I didn't sleep. I closed the notebook and slipped it back into my purse. Around me, the kitchen continued its slow return to order. Surfaces wiped, tools cleaned, evidence erased. But mine wouldn't be. I picked up my purse, straightened my dress as best as I could, and walked toward the back exit. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. Why would they? As far as anyone in that building was concerned, my role for the evening was complete. I stepped outside into the cool night air. The sounds of music and laughter were muffled now, contained within walls that had held something very different for me. I stood there for a moment, breathing. Then I walked to my car. I didn't look back, because whatever that night had been for Adrian and Celeste, for me, it was something else entirely. It was the last unpaid shift I would ever work. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was upset. That would have been easier, cleaner, something you could cry through and wake up lighter from. No, what kept me awake was something far more precise. Inventory. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold 3 times before I remembered to drink it, the notebook open in front of me, and drawers pulled halfway out like the house itself was holding its breath. For years, I had kept things, not out of sentiment, not entirely, out of habit. Old calendars stacked in a narrow column beside the cookbooks. Grocery notebooks with dates and quantities written in neat, careful handwriting. Utility bills clipped together with rusting pins. Bank statements I never threw away because you never know. Recipe cards stained with oil and time, each one tied to a memory that had once felt ordinary. Now they weren't ordinary anymore. Now they were evidence. I opened the first drawer and pulled out a bundle of old check stubs, bound together with a faded elastic band that snapped the moment I touched it. The papers fanned slightly across the table. I smoothed them down with my palm and started reading. Rent assistance. Adrian, age 23. Car repair. Adrian, 27. Temporary loan. No return. Another one. And another. I didn't rush. That was important. This wasn't emotion. This was structure. Every entry had to be seen clearly, understood, placed where it belonged. I wrote in the notebook. Direct financial support. Ongoing. Underlined. Then I moved to the next stack. A small ledger I had almost forgotten about. Brown cover, corners softened with use. Inside, columns, dates, notes. Not money this time. Meals. Not recipes. Records. Adrian plus guest. Dinner. 4 people, Sunday. Late meal, 11:40 p.m. At first, I almost laughed. Who keeps track of meals like that? I do, apparently. Or I did. I ran my finger down the page slowly. Week after week. Year after year. Not detailed enough to impress anyone at first glance, but consistent. Relentless. I turned to a fresh page in the notebook. Meal preparation. Daily/extended. Then paused. No, that wasn't accurate enough. I crossed it out. Meal preparation. Primary domestic function. 30 years. Better. More precise. The clock on the wall ticked softly as I stood and moved to the hallway cabinet. That one was deeper. Less organized. Things got pushed there when they no longer had an immediate use, but weren't ready to be thrown away. I opened it and crouched down. A shoebox sat in the back, half covered by an old folded tablecloth. I pulled it out, brushing dust from the lid, and set it on the table. Inside, receipts, pharmacy, school supplies, clothing, small things, constant things. I picked one at random. Children's antibiotics, another, winter coat, another, laundry detergent, bulk. I stopped there for a second. Laundry. Of course. I looked down at my hands. Even now, I could feel it. The rhythm of it. Sorting, washing, drying, folding. The quiet, endless cycle that keeps a household running without anyone ever naming it as work. I wrote again. Laundry. Full household service, 30 years. Then I added a line beneath it. Includes emergency, overnight, and volume overload. Because it had. More times than I could count. A memory surfaced without permission. Adrian, at 17, coming home with a duffel bag full of clothes after a week away, dropping it by the door like it would solve itself. It always had. Until now. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf in the living room. Not for books. for the box on the bottom shelf, the one with old documents I rarely touched. Inside was something I hadn't thought about in years: medical notes, short ones, nothing formal, just dates, symptoms, times. Fever, 2 a.m. Stayed awake. Missed work. I sat down slowly. Every night I didn't sleep. The words from the notebook echoed back at me. And suddenly, they weren't abstract anymore. They were documented. Not beautifully, not professionally, but consistently enough to matter. I wrote it down. Overnight care. Medical/child support. Then I stopped. The page was filling now. Not with feelings. With categories. Clear. Structured. Defensible. I leaned back in the chair and looked at it. For the first time, I could see it not as a life I had lived, but as something measurable, quantifiable, and more importantly, presentable. That was the shift. This wasn't going to be a conversation. It wasn't going to be an argument. It was going to be a document. I closed the notebook gently, placed my hand on top of it, and sat there in the quiet house, listening to nothing but the ticking clock and my own steady breathing. 30 years. Not invisible anymore. Just unpaid. Warren Sloan didn't interrupt me once. That was the first thing I noticed. Men like him, gray suit, quiet office, shelves lined with leather-bound volumes no one actually reads, usually interrupt. Not rudely. Just enough to steer you, to shape what you're saying into something more convenient for them. Warren didn't. He sat across from me, fingers lightly touching, eyes steady, and let me finish placing the second box on his desk. Then the third. By the time I was done, his polished mahogany surface was no longer polished. It was covered. Papers, ledgers, notebooks, envelopes, a small stack of receipts I had clipped together that morning with a brass fastener I found in the back of a drawer. This, I said calmly, resting my hand on the top box, is 30 years. He leaned back slightly, studying me, not the boxes. Me. And what exactly, he asked after a moment, would you like to do with it? There it was. Not disbelief, not confusion. Just the question that mattered. I took a breath, not to steady myself, but to make sure I said it correctly. I want it documented, properly, categorized, valued. He nodded once, slowly. Go on? I opened the top box and pulled out the brown ledger first, placing it between us. Meals, I said. Daily, extended. Guests included. 30 years. His eyes flicked down, scanning a page, then another. Not reading every word, measuring structure. Consistency. Continue. I slid the next stack forward. Laundry, full household. Volume varies, but consistent. Includes emergencies. Then the receipts. Direct financial support. Loans that were never returned. I've marked the ones that were explicitly called temporary. A pause. Not from me. From him. I noticed it. Good. Then I reached for the smaller notebook, the one with the short, almost careless entries. Overnight care, medical, child support. Not formal, but consistent. He took that one in his hands. That was the first time he touched anything. Silence stretched for a few seconds as he flipped a page. Then another. When he looked up again, something had shifted. Not sympathy. Respect. You've kept records, he said. Yes. For 30 years. Yes. Another pause. Then finally, the real question. And you want compensation? I met his gaze without hesitation. I want it accounted for. That mattered. The wording. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once more, slower this time. That's different. I know. He closed the notebook carefully and placed it back on the desk, aligning it with the others with a precision that didn't feel accidental. If we do this, he said, it won't be emotional. It isn't. It won't be a statement. It will be a document. That's exactly what I want. Another silence. Shorter now, more certain. Warren reached for a legal pad, uncapped his pen, and wrote a single word at the top. Invoice. He turned the pad slightly so I could see it. Then we build it properly, he said. Categories, time frames, market equivalents where applicable, supporting documentation attached or referenced. It needs to hold. It will. His pen moved again. Who is the recipient? Adrian Vale. No hesitation, no softening. He nodded. Understood. I watched as he began structuring it. Sections, headings, notes. Not fast, not slow. Exact. This won't be small, he said after a moment. I'm not interested in small. Another glance up, brief, measuring. Then back to the page. We'll need to be careful with valuation. Domestic labor over that span, if we calculate conservatively, it will still accumulate significantly. Good. He allowed himself the faintest trace of something. Not a smile, not approval, recognition. Then he closed the pad. I'll assign a paralegal to assist. We'll digitize everything, cross-reference where needed, and build a formal draft. He paused, then added, How many pages are you expecting? I thought about it for exactly 1 second. Enough. This is the moment right here. No yelling, no tears, just structure and intent. She walked into that office with boxes, not emotions. Tell me honestly, would you go this far? Or would you still try to talk it out? Warren leaned back again, studying me one last time. Very well, Mrs. Vale, he said quietly. Let's begin. And just like that, it stopped being a story and became a case. The first draft took 4 days, not because it was difficult, because it had to be exact. I sat in Warren's office again, this time without boxes, just a folder placed neatly in front of me. Thicker than I expected, lighter than it should have felt. He didn't slide it over right away. We've structured it into sections, he said, tapping the folder lightly. Domestic labor, financial support, care services, supplemental contributions, each category broken down by time span and supported where possible. Where possible, I repeated. He gave a small nod. You were more thorough than most clients who walk in here with business disputes. That didn't surprise me. I opened the folder. The first page was clean, formal, no emotion anywhere on it. Invoice of services rendered. Recipient. Adrian Vale. My eyes moved down the page slowly. 30 years condensed into language that didn't care about feelings, just facts. I turned the page. Section 1, domestic labor, meal preparation, daily, extended, and event-based. Estimated frequency, consistent, multi-decade. Valuation, calculated using market replacement rates. There it was. Market value. I let that sit for a second, because that was the part no one ever says out loud. That what you do at home, every day, quietly, has a price if someone else has to do it. I flipped to the next section. Laundry services, detailed, structured, even noted variations in volume. A small note at the bottom. Includes emergency and high-frequency cycles. I almost smiled. High-frequency cycles. That was one way to describe a teenage boy who thought clothes cleaned themselves. Next. Financial support. This section was heavier. Tables, dates, amounts, notes. Temporary. Urgent. Short-term. None returned. Each one listed without commentary. Just numbers. Just reality. Then, care services. Overnight care. Medical supervision. Child support functions beyond standard expectations. That wording stopped me for a moment. beyond standard expectations. I looked up. Warren noticed. "We had to be careful there," he said. "Legally, parenting isn't billable, but extended measurable care outside baseline expectations, especially when it replaces external services, can be argued." Argued, not assumed. I nodded slowly. "Good. Let it be argued." I turned another page. Supplemental contributions, event preparation, administrative support, crisis management. I paused. Crisis management? Warren didn't look up from his notes. "Your records," he said calmly. "Legal issues, financial gaps, personal situations requiring intervention. You didn't label them that way. We did. Of course they did. Because that's what it had been. Not just helping, managing, stabilizing, preventing collapse." I closed the folder halfway, resting my hand on it. "How many pages?" 47, he said. That felt right. Not round, not symbolic. Just complete. "And the total?" I asked. Warren finally looked at me directly. "Conservatively calculated?" "Yes. $612,000. Silence settled between us. Not heavy, not shocking, just precise. I absorbed it without reacting. Because the number wasn't the point. The structure was. "Good," I said. Warren studied me for a moment longer, then leaned back slightly. "There's something else," he added. "We've included a response window, 30 days, and formal delivery, certified." "Of course." "And Marilyn," he said, using my name now, not Mrs. Vale. "Once this is sent, it doesn't stay private unless he chooses to keep it that way." I know. That was part of it. Not exposure, accountability. I closed the folder completely this time. Send it. No hesitation. No adjustment. No softening. Warren gave a single nod. "I'll have it dispatched this afternoon." I stood up, smoothing my sleeve without thinking. 30 years, 47 pages, $612,000, neatly printed, properly structured, impossible to ignore. As I reached the door, Warren spoke again. "Most people," he said quietly, "wouldn't go this far." I paused, then turned slightly. "Most people," I replied, "would have kept serving." And with that, I walked out. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. Certified. Signature required. Adrian signed for it without thinking. That's what he later told me, though I didn't need him to. I could picture it clearly. His hand moving automatically, his attention already somewhere else. A man used to receiving documents that confirmed his control, not questioned it. He didn't open it right away. That part mattered more than anything. Because if he had, even a few minutes earlier, the day might have unfolded differently. But he set it aside. That's what people do when they believe nothing in their life can surprise them. It sat on his kitchen counter for almost an hour, between a polished espresso machine and a bowl of fruit no one actually ate. Celeste walked past it twice. Once, she asked, "What's that?" without slowing down. He said, "Probably something from the bank," and that was enough. Normal morning, predictable, controlled. Then he opened it. Not carefully, not cautiously. He tore the top edge, slid the contents out, and glanced at the first page while still standing. That was when the silence started. Not dramatic, just absence. Celeste noticed it first. "Adrian?" she called from the other room. No answer. She stepped into the kitchen, still holding her phone, mid-message, mid-thought. "Did you—" She stopped, because of his face. Not anger, not confusion. Something else. Disruption. "What is it?" she asked, sharper now. He didn't respond immediately. His eyes were moving down the page, slower now. reading, not scanning. Then he turned the page. Then another. The sound of paper shifting in a quiet kitchen. "What is that?" she repeated. He finally spoke. "It's from her. Not my mother, not even my name. Just her." Celeste stepped closer, reaching for the pages. He didn't stop her. She read the heading first. Invoice of services rendered. A small pause. Then she laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "You're kidding." He didn't laugh. That was the second crack. She kept reading. Section headers, categories, numbers. Her expression changed gradually, not all at once. The smile faded first, then the slight amusement, then the certainty. "What is this?" she asked again, but differently now. He turned another page. 47 pages, he said quietly. "Of what?" He didn't answer, because by then he had reached the number. It was placed exactly where it needed to be. Clear, unavoidable. $612,000. The room stayed silent. Celeste took the pages from his hands completely now, flipping faster, scanning, searching for something. An error, a joke, a flaw she could point to and dismiss. But there wasn't one. Not an obvious one. "This is insane," she said finally. "This is actually insane." Adrian was still standing in the same place, still looking at the same line. "No," he said, quiet, flat. "This is structured." That was the moment it shifted. Not when he saw the number, when he understood it wasn't random. Celeste looked at him sharply. "You're not taking this seriously." "I am." "You can't be." He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, something he hadn't done in years. Not since before everything became controlled, managed, curated. "She documented everything," he said. Celeste scoffed. "That doesn't mean anything. She's your mother. You don't invoice." He cut her off. She categorized it. That stopped her, because even she understood what that meant. Not emotion, structure, not accusation. Presentation? He reached for the final page, the one Warren insisted on placing at the end. Response required within 30 days. Formal, direct, clean. Celeste shook her head, stepping back slightly, as if distance would change what she was seeing. "She's bluffing." Adrian didn't respond, because he already knew. She wasn't. And for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't in control of what came next. "He didn't call me immediately." That's what surprised me most when I later thought about it. Adrian always reacted fast. Decisions, messages, damage control. He built his entire life on speed and confidence, but this time, he didn't move. He read. Again. And again. By the third pass, he wasn't looking at the headings anymore. He was looking at the details, dates, notes, cross-references, the quiet parts. Celeste, on the other hand, couldn't sit still. "This is absurd," she said, pacing now. "This is actually delusional. You don't pay your mother for raising you." "That's not how anything works." Adrian didn't respond. He had stopped hearing tone. He was hearing structure. "She attached documentation," he said finally. Celeste turned sharply. "Documentation of what? Cooking? Laundry? That's called being a parent." He looked up at her then. "Not all of it." That slowed her, just slightly. He flipped to one of the financial sections, sliding the page across the counter toward her. "Look at this." She didn't want to. That was obvious. But she did. Her eyes moved across the table of numbers, the notes beside them. Temporary. Emergency. Short term. Her jaw tightened. "That's different," she said quickly. "Those were gifts." "Were they?" he asked. No accusation, just a question. And that made it worse. Celeste straightened. Of course they were. What else would they be? Adrian didn't answer, because for the first time, he wasn't sure. That uncertainty, it didn't show on his face fully. But it was there, in the way he didn't reach for the next page right away, in the way his fingers stayed still. I'm calling her, Celeste said suddenly, grabbing her phone. No. The word came fast, sharp. She froze. What do you mean, no? I mean no. He finally moved, taking the phone gently but firmly from her hand and placing it back on the counter. That's exactly what she expects. Celeste stared at him. She sent you a bill for $600,000, Adrian. I think a call is appropriate. She wants a reaction, he said. She's going to get one. He shook his head slowly. No, she's not. That was the third shift. Not panic, strategy. Celeste watched him closely now, recalculating. So what? You're just going to ignore it? No. He tapped the final page again. 30 days. And we don't respond emotionally. She let out a short, incredulous laugh. Oh, I'm sorry. Is this a negotiation now? He didn't smile. Yes. Silence. That word landed differently. Because it meant he had accepted something already. Not the amount, not the claim, but the premise. Celeste crossed her arms. This is ridiculous. No one is going to take this seriously. Adrian looked at the pages again, at the formatting, at the signatures, at the way everything was laid out, clean, calm, undeniable. She didn't send it to make noise, he said. Celeste didn't reply, because she saw it too now. This wasn't messy. It wasn't emotional. It didn't look like something you could laugh off in a group chat or dismiss over dinner. It looked real. She embarrassed herself, Celeste said finally, but there was less conviction in it now. Adrian closed the folder. No, he said quietly. She didn't. He picked it up, weighing it slightly in his hand, not physically, but mentally. 47 pages, 30 years, one number. Then he walked to the living room and set it down on the table, like something that needed space, distance, perspective. Behind him, Celeste stood still in the kitchen, her expression tightening into something colder, more calculating, because if this wasn't a joke, then it was a problem. And problems, in their world, weren't ignored. They were handled. But neither of them said what both were already thinking. Not yet. Because the question sitting between them wasn't just about money. It was much simpler and far more dangerous. What if she could prove it? By the second day, it started spreading. Not publicly, not loudly, quietly, the way things actually move when they matter. Adrian didn't tell anyone at first. That was deliberate. Containment. Control. But control only works if no one else already holds a piece of the truth. And in this case, people did. It began with a question, a simple one. His cousin, Daniel, called him that afternoon. Casual tone. Too casual. Hey, Daniel said. Weird question. Did your mom, help with the wedding catering? Adrian didn't answer immediately. Why? He asked instead. A pause on the other end. Just, someone mentioned she was in the kitchen most of the night. Someone. That's how it always starts. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. There was a staffing issue. She offered to help. A clean answer. Plausible. Except Daniel didn't sound convinced. Right, he said slowly. Because Aunt Marilyn doesn't exactly strike me as someone who volunteers to plate canapes in a silk dress. That landed. Not hard, but enough. Adrian ended the call shortly after, brushing it off, But something had already shifted, because now there were two narratives, the one he presented and the one people saw. By the third day, Celeste noticed it too. Not directly. Not yet. But in the way conversations changed when she entered a room. In the slight pauses. In the way one of her friends, Alicia, asked a little too lightly, "So, your mother-in-law is very hands-on, huh?" Celeste smiled. Of course she did. "Marilyn likes to stay busy," she replied smoothly. Alicia nodded, but her eyes didn't match the smile. "Interesting," she said. And just like that, it wasn't contained anymore. Meanwhile, the document sat on Adrian's table, untouched. Not physically, he had read it multiple times, but untouched in the sense that no action had been taken. No lawyer called, no response drafted. Because the more he read it, the harder it became to choose a direction. Dismiss it and risk being wrong. Engage it and validate it. Ignore it and let it grow. Every option had weight, and for the first time in a long time, Adrian wasn't moving. On the fourth day, he finally did something. He called Warren's office, not mine. That mattered. "Mr. Sloan is currently unavailable," the receptionist said politely. "May I ask who's calling?" Adrian hesitated for half a second. Then, "Adrian Vale." A pause, subtle, but there. "I see," she said. "One moment, please." Music filled the line. Soft, neutral, designed to keep people calm. It didn't work. When Warren picked up, his voice was exactly the same as it had been with me. Measured. Controlled. "Mr. Vale?" No surprise, no curiosity, just acknowledgement. Adrian straightened slightly, even though no one could see him. "I received a document from your office." "Yes," Warren replied. "That." Adrian stopped, choosing his words carefully. "That document is highly irregular." A beat. "No," Warren said calmly. "It is highly structured." Silence. Adrian wasn't used to that, to someone not reacting the way they were supposed to. "This is my mother," he said finally, as if that settled something. Warren didn't miss a beat. "And you are the recipient," he replied. "Clean, neutral, unmovable." Adrian exhaled slowly. "I assume this is some kind of pressure tactic." "You may interpret it however you like," Warren said. "Our role is documentation and delivery." Another silence. Longer this time, because Adrian was running out of angles. "If I choose not to respond?" he asked. "That is your decision." "And then what?" Warren paused. Just enough. "Then the absence of response becomes part of the record." That was it. That was the line. Not a threat. Not a warning. A fact. Adrian ended the call shortly after, thanking him in a tone that didn't match the situation. When the line went dead, he stood there for a moment, phone still in his hand. Then he looked back at the folder. 47 pages. Still sitting exactly where he left it. But now it felt different. Not like a document. Like a timeline. And whether he responded or not, it was already moving forward. He chose the restaurant. Of course he did. Neutral ground. Public enough to control behavior, private enough to avoid witnesses getting too close. Adrian had always preferred environments where variables could be managed. Lighting, distance, timing. I arrived 5 minutes early. Not out of nerves. Out of habit. The table was already reserved under his name. Window seat. Soft lighting. A place where conversations could look calm from the outside, no matter what was said inside. I sat down, placed my bag beside me, and waited. When he walked in, he didn't look surprised to see me already there, but he did hesitate. Just slightly. That was new. "Mom," he said, approaching the table. Not warm, not cold, measured. Adrian, I replied. We sat. A waiter appeared almost immediately, offering menus. Adrian waved them away. Just water. I nodded once. When the waiter left, the silence settled in, not awkward, not heavy. Structured. He reached into his briefcase and placed the folder on the table between us. Carefully. Like it mattered how it landed. I've read it, he said. I assumed you had. Another pause. I want to understand, he continued, choosing each word, what exactly you think this is. I looked at the folder, then back at him. It's already defined. That's not an answer. It is. His jaw tightened slightly. That document, he said, tapping it lightly, assigns a financial value to things that are not transactional. I tilted my head just a fraction. Not for you. There it was. The first real shift. He leaned back slightly, studying me now, not dismissing, not controlling, trying to recalibrate. You're saying this is what, a correction? He asked. I'm saying it's an accounting. Silence again. But this time, it stretched, because he didn't have a ready response. You could have talked to me, he said finally. I did, I replied calmly. When? For 30 years. That landed. Harder than anything else so far. Look at this moment. No shouting, no drama, just truth placed exactly where it hurts. He came here thinking he'd control the conversation, but now he's reacting. Tell me, what would you say in her place right now? Adrian exhaled slowly, his composure slipping just enough to show the strain underneath. That's not fair, he said. I didn't respond immediately. Then, fair wasn't the system you were operating under. His fingers pressed lightly against the edge of the folder. This is extreme. No, I said. This is complete. Another pause, longer now. You're asking me to pay you, he said, as if saying it out loud might make it less real. I'm asking you to respond. To what? To the record. He looked down at it again. 47 pages. Every section aligned, every category justified, every number sitting exactly where it belonged. And if I don't? He asked quietly. I held his gaze. Then it stands unanswered. That was the moment, the real one. Not when he received it, not when he read it. Now. Because for the first time, Adrian understood something he had never had to consider before. This wasn't about winning. This wasn't about convincing. This wasn't even about the money. It was about something far simpler. He couldn't dismiss it, and he couldn't control it. He leaned back slowly, eyes still on me, and for the first time in his life, he had nothing prepared to say. He didn't argue after that. That was the difference. A week ago, Adrian would have turned the conversation into something else. Tone, blame, perception. He would have redirected, reframed, repositioned himself somewhere safer. Now he stayed where he was. At the table. Across from me. With the document between us. You've already taken steps beyond this, he said finally. Not a question. A realization. I didn't answer immediately. Then, yes. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, in calculation. What kind of steps? I rested my hands lightly on the table. The kind that don't depend on your response. That changed the air. Because now the document wasn't the center anymore. It was just one piece. Adrian leaned forward slightly. Be specific. I've restructured my accounts, I said calmly. Removed discretionary access. Redirected future allocations. His jaw shifted. You're cutting me off. I'm closing a system. That system, he said, a sharper edge slipping through, is how this family has functioned. I held his gaze. No, that system is how you functioned. Silence. Again. But now it carried something heavier. Recognition. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose, slower this time. This affects more than me, he said. There are obligations, commitments. I'm aware. You're putting pressure on things you don't fully understand. I understand them completely. That stopped him, because the certainty didn't match the role he had always assigned to me. You think this is sustainable? He asked. I know it is. Another pause. Then he tried a different angle. What about the estate? He said. You're making decisions that impact long-term structure. There it was. Not concern, positioning. I've updated it, I said. That landed clean. He didn't mask it this time. What does that mean? It means, I replied evenly, that future outcomes are no longer based on past assumptions. He stared at me, longer now, trying to find something familiar, something predictable, but there wasn't anything left for him to recognize. You've planned this, he said quietly. No, I said. I've corrected it. The difference sat between us, clear, unavoidable. He looked down at the folder again, then back at me. And this, he said, tapping it once, is just part of that correction? Yes. A slow breath, measured, controlled, but thinner now. What exactly do you want from me? He asked, not rhetorically, directly. That was new. I answered just as directly. A response. That's it? That's enough. He studied me, searching for something behind the words. Emotion, leverage, weakness. There was none offered. And if my response is no, he asked, then it's documented. And we just exist like this? No, I said calmly. We exist accurately. That was the line that ended it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just definitively. Adrian sat back in his chair, the structure he had relied on his entire life no longer holding the same shape. Because this wasn't a situation he could negotiate the way he always had. This wasn't a misunderstanding he could smooth over. This wasn't a version of events he could rewrite. Everything was already written, categorized, delivered. And now, it was simply waiting for him to decide who he was going to be inside it. It didn't explode. That's the part most people expect. No shouting, no dramatic confrontations, no messages sent in all caps, no family group chats turning into battlefields overnight. It shifted, quietly, and that was worse. Because quiet spreads. 3 days after our meeting, Adrian started noticing it in places he couldn't control. At work first. A colleague, Martin, mid-level, usually forgettable, paused a little too long during a conversation about personal liabilities. Then, casually, you ever had someone try to retroactively invoice you for life stuff? Adrian didn't react outwardly, but he noted it. Someone knew something, not everything, just enough. Later that day, another comment, different person, different tone. Family dynamics can get complicated when money's involved. A glance. Quick. Intentional. Not random. That's how it works when something is believable. It doesn't need to be announced. It circulates. At home, Celeste was managing it differently. Containment. Spin. It's a misunderstanding, she told one friend over lunch. She's older, emotional. You know how that generation can be. It sounded polished, reasonable, except people had seen me in the kitchen, in the dress, carrying trays. And that didn't match misunderstanding. One of the caterers, young, sharp, observant, had already told someone she wasn't staff. You could tell. They just Used her. Used. That word traveled faster than anything else because it required no explanation. Adrian felt it tightening, not publicly, not in a way he could address directly, but in the way conversations shifted slightly off-center when he entered them, in the way people listened a little more carefully when he spoke, in the way certainty, his greatest asset, started to feel thinner. At home, the folder no longer stayed on the table. He moved it, first to his office, then into a drawer, then back out again, because hiding it didn't change what it was. A record, and worse, a plausible one. Celeste noticed his hesitation. "You're letting this get into your head," she said one evening, watching him flip through the pages again. "I'm evaluating it." "You're validating it." That word hung there. He didn't answer immediately. Because part of him knew that line had already been crossed. "It's not about whether it's valid," he said finally. "It is," she replied. "If you treat it like it matters, it becomes real." He looked at her for a long second, then back at the document. "It already is real." That was the fracture, not loud, but final. Because Celeste realized something in that moment. She wasn't fighting me. She was losing control of him. Meanwhile, outside their house, the story kept moving. Not because I pushed it, because it held. That was the difference. No exaggeration, no gaps, just structure. People who had known pieces of the past started fitting them together. An aunt who remembered who paid for Adrian's first apartment, a neighbor who recalled how often I had his son overnight, a former friend who quietly said, "I always wondered how he managed everything so smoothly." He hadn't. I had. And now, there was a document that said exactly that. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just clearly. By the end of the week, Adrian wasn't asking if this was a problem anymore. He knew it was. The only question left was how far it would go. He came back with an offer, not an apology, not an explanation, an offer. That told me everything I needed to know before he even sat down. This time, it wasn't a restaurant. It was Warren's office. Neutral ground again, but different. Controlled, yes, but not by him. Adrian arrived 5 minutes late. Also new. He greeted Warren first, not me. Professional instinct. Established ground. Then he sat, placing a thinner folder on the table, his version of events. "I've reviewed the document," he began, voice steady again, almost back to what it used to be. "And I'm prepared to resolve this." Resolve. Warren didn't respond, just gestured slightly. "Continue." Adrian opened his folder. "I'm willing to offer a settlement," he said. "A private one." "Of course." He slid a single sheet across the table. A number. Lower. Much lower. Structured to look reasonable. Structured to close the situation quickly. "And in return?" Warren asked. Adrian didn't hesitate. "A written acknowledgement," he said, "that the situation was misinterpreted, that there was no intent to—" He stopped himself. Adjusted. No intent to exclude or mistreat. There it was. Not about the money. About the narrative. I didn't touch the paper. Didn't even look at it. "Continue," Warren said. Adrian nodded once. "The matter remains private. No further claims. No external escalation. Clean, efficient, contained, exactly the kind of solution Adrian had built his life on." I let the silence stretch just long enough. Then, "No. Not louder, not sharper. Just final." Adrian blinked once. A small thing, but real. "I don't think you understand," he said, leaning forward slightly. "This is a reasonable resolution." "It is," I replied calmly. That confused him. Then why? Because it solves the wrong problem. That stopped him. Warren remained still, watching, always watching. This isn't about perception, I continued. It's about record. Adrian's expression tightened. You're willing to drag this further? He asked. I'm willing to let it stand. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, the control slipping again, but thinner now, more fragile. You're asking me to agree to something I fundamentally don't accept. No, I said. I'm asking you to respond to something that already exists. Silence. He looked down at his own paper, then at mine. 47 pages versus 1. Structure versus strategy. History versus positioning. You want me to validate this, he said quietly. I want you to face it. That was the line, the one he couldn't move around, the one that didn't give him space to reframe. His fingers tapped once against the table, a habit I hadn't seen since he was younger, before everything became polished, before everything became controlled. This is going to damage things, he said. It already has. Another pause. Longer now. Because there was nothing left to negotiate. No angle, no shortcut, no version where he kept control and closed the situation cleanly. Only a choice. Accept the record or stand against it. And either way, it wouldn't disappear. Adrian closed his folder slowly, carefully, then looked at me. Really looked this time. Not as something to manage, not as something to reposition, but as something he hadn't accounted for. You've changed, he said. I held his gaze. No, I replied. I've stopped adjusting. That ended it. Not the situation, not the consequences. Just the illusion that this could be contained. Because as Adrian stood up and left that office, one thing was finally clear to him. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was a line. And he had already crossed it. He didn't pay immediately. That's important. Because this wasn't a story about a man suddenly realizing everything and fixing it overnight. Adrian didn't transform. He calculated. He resisted. He delayed. For 21 days, not 30. That number mattered too. In those 3 weeks, everything settled into its final shape. Not loudly, not publicly, just firmly. He stopped trying to reframe it. That was the first sign. No more language about misunderstanding. No more careful positioning in conversations. No more quiet corrections when someone mentioned the wedding. He let it exist. That was new. Celeste, on the other hand, fought it longer. Tried to contain it, minimize it, shift it into something smaller. But even she understood eventually, this wasn't something you could shrink. Because it wasn't growing. It was already complete. On the 21st day, Warren called me. Partial agreement, he said. Define partial. A structured settlement, not the full amount, not your son's original offer. I didn't ask for the number right away. That includes acknowledgement? I asked. A pause. Yes. That was the only part that mattered, not the figure, the record. I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of relief, not out of emotion, just to mark it. 30 years. Accounted. I'll review it, I said. When the documents arrived, they were exactly what I expected. Clean. Precise. No emotional language. No apologies written the way people imagine apologies should be. Just acknowledgement that the contributions existed, that they had value, that they had been relied upon, signed, dated, final. I read it once, then again, then I signed. Not because it fixed anything, but because it closed something. Adrian didn't call after that, not immediately, not even the next week. And that was fine, because whatever relationship we had before, built on assumption, on quiet imbalance, on things left unnamed. That version didn't exist anymore, and it wasn't coming back. A month later, I stood in my kitchen again. Same table, same drawers. But nothing felt the same. The notebook was still there. Closed now. Finished. I didn't need to add anything else to it. That part of my life had been written, documented, resolved. Not emotionally, not symbolically, accurately. I made myself tea the way I always had. Slow, measured. The small, ordinary ritual of it felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. For the first time in years, I wasn't anticipating a call, a request, a problem that needed solving. There was no background weight, no invisible ledger running in the back of my mind. Just quiet. Clean. Earned. I took my cup and walked to the window, looking out at the same street I had looked at for decades. Nothing out there had changed either. But I had. Not into someone new. Into someone clear. Because in the end, it wasn't about making him pay. It wasn't about revenge. It was about something much simpler. He had treated my life like it didn't need to be counted. And I showed him that it already had been. Honestly, I would have done the same. No drama, no shouting, just a clean finish. If someone treats you like you don't matter for 30 years, one day they need to see the cost. What about you? Would you go all the way? Comment, like, and subscribe.